appreciate your interest. And as posted, just to let everyone know, we're going to be recording this session so that we can share it with those who weren't able to attend. I am Amy Herman, and I am one of the co-chairs of BBYO's Parent Advisory Council. I am also a second generation BBG alum from North Carolina and a parent here in the DC area for Northern Region East DC Council. Our council, the Parent Council, has been formed to help BBYO forge a parent community that extends globally and acts locally to enrich this amazing teen-led movement. To break this down, what we focus on is supporting BBYO with membership recruitment by building partnerships with local organizations like JCCs and synagogues and federations. We also help boost fundraising by educating parents on the needs of BBYO. And like we are doing tonight, we develop opportunities for parent connection and education. We started doing these educational programs in the last year and a half, and they've been very popular, and we are looking for new ideas to bring to you and appreciate that you're enjoying participating. And if you're interested in getting involved more as a parent yourself, we'd love to work with you. Now I am happy to throw the conversation over to my Parent Council fellow member, Alan Gallatin.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am Alan Gallatin. As Amy mentioned, I'm a member of the Parent Council, and I am part of the Michigan region of BBYO, and most importantly, a proud parent of a BBG. I'd also like to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Samantha Vinokur-Meinrath. Samantha is a lifelong Jewish educator and learner. She's the Senior Director of Knowledge, Ideas, and Learning at the Jewish Education Project, where she oversees national strategy related to teens, anti-Semitism education, Jewish peoplehood education, and Jewish identity development. Samantha is the author of #Antisemitism, Coming of Age During the Resurgence of Hate, and is a recognized expert on Jewish Gen Zers and rising anti-Semitism. She has lived and taught in Jewish communities throughout the United States and Israel, and is an alumna of the University of Pittsburgh, Jewish Theological Seminary, and Gratz College. Samantha lives in Westchester, New York with her husband, her baby boy, and 2 beloved rescue dogs. After her presentation, Samantha will be joined in conversation with Amy. She looks forward to taking your questions. So while the presentation is going on, please submit your questions through the chat feature of Zoom. Specifically direct them to the attendee questions for Samantha, and we will try our best to get to as many questions as possible. So with that, Samantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you to everyone truly for being here tonight and for taking of your time and your efforts to have what is an increasingly relevant, heartbreakingly current conversation. So as was said, I'm Samantha. Can I say I'm an aspirational BBYO parent, but my son is 9 months old and teething. So I hope you will all have pity on me as I strive to bring all of my enthusiasm, none of my yawning, and any tips on teething babies, you can feel free to also include in the chat. Separate from that, how did I come to be here to talk about anti-Semitism? In some ways, I would say that I was predetermined that I was inevitably going to become an expert on anti-Semitism. I'm the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor and learned about anti-Semitism far younger than was probably appropriate, to the point where for more years than I care to admit, I thought that I was a member of the Von Trapp family, a la Sound of Music, because my grandma escaped the Nazis and she was 7 and they had a 7-year-old and there was some Nazi escaping happening. And despite the fact that none of us have any discernible musical talent, that was a leap that I was able to make. Instead, I became a Jewish educator, and I did not want to focus on anti-Semitism. I wanted to focus on all the things that we want to be talking about with teens: thriving and Jewish joy and Jewish pride. And let's talk about food and Israel and all of the amazing things that our tradition and our innovative spirit collectively has to offer. And so I was doing my doctoral research on Jewish teens, perhaps not the ones represented by the parents in this room, but I'm sure we all know someone who I was trying to reach, because I was trying to reach those who aren't involved. I wanted to understand the teens who don't show up post B'nai Mitzvah. What, if any, value add did they see Judaism as bringing to their lives? And how could I, as someone who works in this world of Jewish teens, meet their needs better and give recommendations to the field that would get all these people showing up for our amazing programs and wanting to be involved and just knocking down our doors, because we have to dream big here. One of the questions that I asked the teens who I interviewed was, what comes to mind when I say Jewish space? What is a Jewish space for you? And I got every answer that I expected: school and camp and synagogue and my grandma's house and Israel. And I was like, yes, okay, we're on the same page. And then I asked them if they felt comfortable in the spaces that they thought of and that came to mind for them as this "what is a Jewish space" question. And instead of the answers that I thought I would get, these meta existential questions of, am I comfortable in that my gender identity is affirmed? Am I comfortable in that my politics are part of the mainstream, that my views are welcome here? Instead, I got heartbreakingly practical replies, much more to the effect of, well, since the shooting at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, there's always an armed guard outside the synagogue that my family goes to, so I guess I feel comfortable there. Or, did you know that the day school in my community got government funding for bulletproof glass? So that's too bad that we need it. So I don't know if I'm fully comfortable, but it's good that it's there, so I guess so. And I started to realize how much the uptick in anti-Semitism and in questions about particularly physical safety in Jewish spaces and for Jewish teens was shaping their coming of age story and what they were thinking about, feeling, deciding when it came to their Jewish selves. So, as any profoundly nerdy educator would, I started delving deep. And for me, that manifested in my book, #Antisemitism, as well as the work that I'm privileged to do every day for the Jewish Education Project and the Jewish people as a whole. And what I'm here to do tonight is give you guys a overview, far too short, but there's always more to be discussed about anti-Semitism, where we are now, and really to highlight the voices from our teens, because that's what we want to be talking about. So if you'll give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen and we will jump right in. Here we go. Okay. So first, getting on the same page, definition of anti-Semitism. In many cases, for so many of us, this is a I know it when I see it type thing, but actually that's not always true. So I'm using the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's 2016 definition of anti-Semitism, which has been adopted by numerous governments, private businesses, states around the world, and as well as the United States State Department as their definition of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Hopefully that is pretty comprehensive for everyone. Part of what I want to highlight here is this idea of may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Anti-Semitism is easy to see and note and recognize when it looks like we expect it to, when it looks like, God forbid, a swastika being drawn on the locker of a Jewish student or the home of a Jewish family. We as a community are really good at pointing that out and saying, this is not okay, and knowing what to do and how to spring into action. Where we're struggling in many ways is in those microaggression spaces, those spaces where our teens might say, I don't know if that really counted as anti-Semitism, but I know it was awkward. I know it made me uncomfortable that someone asked where we were going on vacation because I have so much money, or told me about a sale coming up because we know that Jews love a good bargain. It's those nuanced, awkward moments that come up far more regularly than out and avowed hatred that, at least in theory, we know what to do with. So what are we talking about here? 90% of American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is either a very serious problem or somewhat of a problem. This is a 2021 stat waiting for the from the Anti-Defamation League, eagerly waiting for the 2022 numbers to come out, but I can imagine they've only gone up as anti-Semitism has become more and more pervasive in our society, especially in increasingly public ways. But suffice it to say, 90% is a staggering number. 90% of Jews agreeing on something, all the more so. However, only 60% of the general public believes the same, that anti-Semitism is either a very serious or somewhat of a serious problem. Now, 60% is a good number. It's more than half. People understand, people know this, but so much of what we have to deal with comes into this gap between that 60% and that 90 or even 100%, because we're not caught up in the work of fixing anti-Semitism and figuring out how do we become a more inclusive, less hateful society. Instead, we spend so much time figuring out how do we just convince people that that counted as anti-Semitism, that this is real, that this is something to be concerned about. How do we move that number from that 60% to get more people to understand what's happening to this community and that we're in need of allyship and support, just as many other minority communities are at this moment. Older Americans are more likely to say that anti-Semitism is a problem, with 70% of those ages 65 plus agreeing with that original statement that anti-Semitism is either a very serious or somewhat of a serious problem, as opposed to only 52% of those ages 18 to 35. The fact that this is becoming more and more of a question for younger generations of, did that count? Is that real? I'm not really sure if that you guys aren't just like making too big a deal out of this and crying wolf and being overly sensitive. It's critical for our teens because they're the ones encountering those 18 to 35-year-olds. Someone who's 18 to 35 is going to be presumably their RA in a dorm, their maybe supervisor at an internship, maybe a first boss, maybe a role model, maybe someone who they're socially interacting with. We're only a couple of years removed. And to know that they are encountering a population where nearly half of the people first need to be convinced of the legitimacy of anti-Semitism as a problem is something that we need to acknowledge and understand, that they are encountering a different world than many of us are when it comes to what they need in terms of support from their peers and about their peers. 1 in every 4 American Jews was a victim of anti-Semitism between 2020 and 2021. Now, I'm not here to be a fearmonger and to say that means that 1 in 4 of every American Jew was, God forbid, a victim of physical anti-Semitism, some kind of assault or attack. So much of this happens in the online space in terms of social media. So much of it happens in the field of microaggressions and awkward comments and things that many of us, again, fall into that stat, but didn't necessarily feel the need to report or make a big deal out of, but we know that we're carrying it with us. And likewise, we want to figure out what are our teens carrying with them. And finally, the ADL's most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States recorded more than 2,100 acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment. Just recently, last week, January 2023, the Anti-Defamation League released a new survey on anti-Semitic attitudes in the United States, and I just wanted to highlight a few pieces here. 20% of respondents to this survey, again, of the general population, said that Jews have, quote, too much power. More than half of Americans believe at least one anti-Jewish conspiracy theory or trope. That might be everything from we have horns on our head, we have big noses, we control the banks, we control the weather. If we did control the weather, I have many, many follow-up questions for whomever is on that shift today for us as a people. We are cheap, we are loud, anything and everything we can all fill in an anti-Semitic stereotype, unfortunately, I'd say pretty easily, but more than half of Americans believe at least one of them. 39% of respondents say that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. Dual loyalty is a destabilizing anti-Semitic theory that is really, really frightening and concerning, and especially for many of our teens who are trying to figure out their own feelings about Israel, who maybe have been, maybe haven't, maybe know that they like it, maybe feel like they're supposed to like it, maybe are challenged by the current government. To have this idea of dual loyalty comes up a lot. And finally, belief in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and tropes nearly doubled compared to 2019 and is currently its highest in 30 years. Now, I came of age in almost a blip in terms of the worldwide historical age-old Jewish experience. Anti-Semitism was something that felt present because of my Holocaust survivor grandmother, but was very much past. It was history. It was something I had to learn about. It was not something that I was experiencing. It was not something presumably that many of us were experiencing. And our teens right now are having a very different coming of age story. So let's hear directly from them. Each of these quotes comes from a teen who I interviewed as part of my book journey. I've shared some of them here to highlight some of the different topics that we talked about. And I'll go into a few minutes of detail as I give these overviews. So first up, we've got on Israel. Ariel was a high school junior in Connecticut when I interviewed her and self-identified as an Instagrammer, which I was like, cool, good for you. And she said, I don't like that as soon as someone hears that I'm Jewish, they automatically bring up Israel. They are not one and the same, but they're not fully separate either. Ariel is someone who likes Israel, who had been to Israel, who falls into the like super involved, engaged kid who has positive affiliations with Israel, already an anomaly for so many of our communities and so many of our teens. But this idea of being equated Jewish and Israel was and remains challenging for her, to not be able to just be herself and to say, I'm from Connecticut. Like your baggage about Israel is not mine to deal with, to have that association. Again, not outright anti-Semitic to say that connecting Jews and Israel, but to give someone, to give a Jewish student in that case, the responsibility for Israel is destabilizing to their Jewish identity. On the Holocaust, the generation that we are raising right now is going to be the last generation to have meaningful relationships with Holocaust survivors. Survivors are dying out at an alarming rate, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're exploring already ways to keep the Holocaust's legacy present as it moves from living memory into history. But our Gen Zers are universalists, not necessarily particularists, and they have different thoughts. So Mara was a SUNY Binghamton freshman when I interviewed her, and she said, I get confused about other people's sensitivities regarding Holocaust imagery. When people said you can't call the detention facilities on the southern border a concentration camp, well, why not? If that's what it's going to take to get my parents to listen to what's going on, why not? I think that's a fine way to use our history. Mara is connected to the Holocaust. She understood for herself what its legacy meant, but for her, what its legacy meant wasn't specific to necessarily the Jewish community, the Jewish experience in an exclusive way. She was able to see it through this universalist lens. And as the Holocaust is brought up more and more in contexts not related to its actual origin, either for purposes of activism or anti-Semitism, as the Holocaust imagery is increasingly co-opted against the Jewish community, we have these questions of what's okay, what's not okay, how do we deal with this? On Jewish choices, every time I see anti-Semitism on social media, I feel like I have to make a choice. Am I going to comment back and get into a whole spam war about it? Or should I just let it go and keep scrolling and not engage? Ilana was a freshman from the DC suburbs in Maryland when I interviewed her. And we had the opportunity to explore the difference between the recommendations that so many of us give when it comes to in-person, in real life, quote unquote, and online. And for our teens, we know online is just as real as their in-person experiences. So often, many of us have conversations with teens about being an upstander and not a bystander. We don't let people get bullied. Our teens know that they are role models and activists and advocates and allies, and we're so proud of them for that. But then it comes to the social media space, and they don't want to engage with every troll or bot online that is peddling anti-Semitic tropes and hate speech. And we also recognize and acknowledge that it's not their burden to figure out how to fix society. And I'll say this throughout, anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a global problem that Jews are largely the victims of. And our teens are not, and ourselves are not responsible for fixing the world other than as members of the world and being our best selves and all that we're able to contribute. On physical safety, since the shooting at Tree of Life, we keep our voices down more when we talk about being Jewish in public. Be respectful of others. We are who we are, but we don't claim it as much. Abby is a New York-based mother of 2 Gen Zers, and she told me a story that I think many can relate to. She was in a store with her then tween age children. One of them, as one does, wanted something and starts saying from the next aisle over, "Mom, can I have that? Mom, I want that for Hanukkah. Can I have that? Mom, Hanukkah's coming up. Can I please, please, please have that?" And she had this moment, not of like, okay, my kid wants something and like, whatever, but of awkwardness of, I don't know if I want them to be yelling about Hanukkah in public. I don't know if I want them to be saying that we're different and that this isn't about Christmas and this isn't about my birthday, but to name Hanukkah and to be loud while doing it and to be kind of obnoxious while doing it. And then having this really like unfortunate, sad reaction in herself to say, I don't know what it means to tell my kid to keep her voice down about being Jewish in public. I want her to be loud and proud. I raised her to be loud and proud. But I also know there's this question of safety and comfort and how we balance those out. On social media, I posted a video about making gefilte fish on TikTok, and people responded with Free Palestine. And then they said that they wish that Hitler had killed both sides of my family, the Jewish and the Romani, in the Holocaust. Elisheva is based in Central Ohio. She identifies as both Jewish and part of the Roma people from an interfaith family. And as one does, when she started being interested in her cultural heritage and identity, created an Instagram and a TikTok account to document that journey of self-exploration. And in her case, unfortunately, she was attacked. She met with such vitriol about things that she said to me were so innocuous. She wasn't talking about Israel. She was actually probably far more to the left in terms of her own views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than many. But somehow just owning and claiming her Jewish identity led to this Free Palestine thing that she said she was like, I'm not even opposed to that. That's great with me. But then it turns into death threats. And it turns into wishes of destruction for herself and her family. And ultimately, in that case, she made the decision to prioritize her own mental health and shut down her accounts rather than be continually faced with this kind of hatred. So it's real. And we're seeing, again, it can be often too easy to write off. It's online, they're strangers, like this isn't a big deal. It's not like it's your friends in school. But when people are sending hate messages and hate speech directly into our pockets, directly into our hands, directly into our bedrooms, it's really real. Then we have on identity. My optimism has been informed by my Jewish values, by the things that I was taught, and the idea that we're on an upward trajectory toward making the world a more whole place. We don't want our teens' Jewish identity to be defined by anti-Semitism, for better or for worse. There are those for whom it causes them to contract themselves and to say, I don't want to be as loud, as visibly Jewish. I just kind of want this all to go away. That's legitimate. There are others who say loud and proud, you're not going to tell me to be anything other than my most authentic self. And I'm going to go get a Jewish star the size of a hubcap. And you are never going to tell me that I'm not supposed to wear that. Also legitimate, also great. Also a response to this external hatred. We want their Jewish identities to be shaped in a self-motivated internal way. And how do we help them do that? So a couple more quotes on parenting Gen Z. Hopefully some here can relate to it. Success would be if my kids see Judaism as an obligation, but not a burden in their lives. I see college students who will say they're only Jewish inside their homes and in these little bubbles, but they don't want to put up signs advertising Hillel events or show their Judaism outside of those limited spaces. I want my kids to be comfortable being Jewish wherever they are. And I think ultimately that so hits home. We don't want an AZA or a BBG shirt to only be worn in the spaces where it's designated. We want them to be their full selves, and this is so integral to their full selves and who they are, and to feel comfortable and safe claiming that in the rest of their lives as well. And this one I just always have to include on the Jewish future. This came from Zeke, who was a sophomore in Maryland when I interviewed him, who said, we're a damn force to be reckoned with. I'm concerned about the state of anti-Semitism in the world. I'm concerned about its growing preponderance. I'm concerned about the number of people, celebrities, regular folk who are ascribing to anti-Semitic tropes. I'm not concerned about our teens. I think that they are doing amazing work and are in a space where we have a lot to be proud of and a lot of good things coming. So first, I just want to share a quote about Jewish joy from Deborah Lipstadt, who is now the special envoy on anti-Semitism. We are bearers of a magnificent tradition, one that expresses itself in religious, intellectual, philanthropic, artistic, communal, and political contexts. Despite the best efforts of so many generations of non-Jews to harm, kill, and even annihilate us, we celebrate the multifaceted tradition that is ours and all it has given to the world. We do so not because of the attempt to destroy us, but despite it. Ultimately, I think that's what so many of us are here to do. We're here to help our kids figure out how can they feel comfortable? How can they be loud and proud? How can they access that sense of Jewish joy and not have that be stamped out by the practical realities of like, we have to go to a training on anti-Israel sentiment on college campus, when we want them to be excited about living their best lives and all that that entails. So what do we do? Glad you asked. First up, we have to figure out and name our needs. So for each of us and each family, that's something different. Is it that you are looking really for education and you're like, my kid has absolutely no idea that big noses are a Jewish stereotype and we need to do some just like, you know, down and like, we need to do some learning and we need to understand the history of anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes and how they manifest today so that they know how to point out if something, God forbid, untoward is happening? Is it that you need moral support because something is happening and you just like need a community to connect with? Is it that you need something practical, that there's a teacher, a friend, a something that is not sitting right and you need to figure out who's there for you? So each of us is coming to something different on this journey. Got to name our needs. Next step is to seek out that support, whether it's through this network of other parents, through the BBYO network, through the world of Jewish education, Jewish educators, and the Jewish nonprofit world. There are people whose entire job is dedicated to supporting our teens and ourselves in this fight against anti-Semitism. And it's not just a Jewish problem. Part of it is figuring out if they're on a college campus, for example, are they able to access the resources entitled to them as minority students? What are the supports that you need? To fortify them and yourself, again, to not make every conversation about Judaism, about being Jewish, about an anti and being in defiance of something and struggling against society. But what are the things that are going to bring us that sense of thriving and joy so that they even want to engage in that struggle rather than checking out? Cultivating allyship. As I said, anti-Semitism is not the problem of the Jewish community to solve, but rather something that we are partnered with the rest of the world on. So what does it mean for us to be allies and to seek allyship? And finally, to educate our teens and ourselves to figure out what are the conversations that we want to be having, who are the people that we want to be in relationship with, and how can we figure out the best practices for doing so? How do we know when to bring something up? How do we know when to like let it go if they don't seem to want to be talking about it? How do we know what counts? How do we know what doesn't? And to continue in those conversations. I know that we're going to go to the Q&A, but the part that I want to end the presentation piece on is to say that this was a really quick overview of an intensely complex topic. I hope that nobody comes out of today saying, she shared some great stats, now I understand anti-Semitism. Although, thank you for the credit there, but rather to say that I hope you're all coming away with a question and that some of you hopefully will ask out loud in the next portion, with a conversation that you want to be having with your teen around your dinner table, on your next carpool ride, that you have something you want to learn more about, something you want to understand about yourselves, about them and the world that they are coming of age within, and that the conversation doesn't end here tonight. So thank you so much, and I'm excited to enter into the next step with you.
Amy, you're on mute.
Amy, you're still on mute. Sorry.
Hear me? Good. Hi. All right, catching up here. Thank you so much, Samantha, for that presentation, and I'm sure that all of us have questions now on how we actually implement some of the suggestions you've just made and summarized in your last slide. So let me dive into some of the questions that we received in advance, and also the ones that are being fed to me right now as all of you write in to the chat. What would be helpful, Samantha, for parents to know as they get themselves and more importantly, their teens prepared for college and the atmosphere of what's going on campuses in relation to this topic?
Amazing. Thank you. The first thing that I would say, we all know these college journeys are increasingly complex. They're starting earlier and earlier. And kol hakavod, all the honor to all of you for going through them with your teens. Anti-Semitism is a reality on college campuses, particularly as anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, as well as directed specifically towards Jews. One of the things that I would really emphasize, though, I do not ascribe to there being good schools and bad schools. A list came out several years ago ranking the top 50 worst schools and best schools for Jews in the United States. The worst school listed was Columbia Barnard. Columbia Barnard is an amazing school. Columbia Barnard is an amazing school for Jews. It has an active Students for Justice in Palestine presence. It has an active anti-Israel voice on the campus. It also has one of the best funded Hillels in the country. It has one of the most robust Jewish studies departments in the country. It has all the resources of New York and all that that offers for a robust, vibrant Jewish life and existence. So when it comes to the college space, I would say not to be fear-mongering and not to let anti-Semitism be the defining factor of what it means to live and thrive Jewishly on a campus. There are so many schools that have amazing, robust learning and growing and living opportunities, and also to know and recognize that there are detractor voices out there, and we need to figure out how to help our teens, young adults, feel empowered to stand up for themselves and others. One practical thing that I will say is every single school that your kids will apply to and ultimately go to has an office that deals with issues of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for them to know that they, as Jewish students, are minority students, entitled to the protections of being minority students and the resources that are therefore available. For many of our teens, they've never really thought about what it means to be necessarily a minority or thought of themselves as someone who falls into the DEI category. I'm generalizing. Of course, there are teens who are coming with deeply intersectional Jewish identities who live that reality every single day. So I also name and own that. But to know that they are not alone, the Jewish community has built-in supports from the secular institutions that they are entitled to and should be accessing.
So Samantha, what is the best way to actually introduce and launch into these tough topics in a way that feels comfortable for teens to discuss and ask further questions and respond? And related to that, from one of you participating tonight, when is the best time to even ask and to address this? Is it when you're in the car? Is it when you're sitting at the dinner table? Give us some ideas.
So every family is different. Every teen is different. I will say in a way that is totally open to the answer being like, Mom, Dad, I'm fine. That it's not grilling about them. Like, so how's your anti-Semitism experience? Is there anything you need to talk about? Sandwiched in between, how was your math test and how are your grades? And by the way, like, I don't know if I like that friend of yours, and anything and everything else that we have on our laundry list of things to talk about. I think part of it is not even necessarily broaching the conversation as a, how are you feeling, teen, but also talking about ourselves. Like, hey, this is a really complex, confusing, scary world that we're living in. And does anti-Semitism come up in the spaces that your family spends time together? Is it something at the dinner table that they're hearing you talk about where you're at with any of it? Are there those natural openings for them to engage and to even think about, oh, this is something my family cares about and talks about? Are there spaces in terms of, again, opportunities to hear what they are or aren't getting elsewhere. Now, sometimes the answer might be, and this is great, like a wonderful problem to have, is your teen saying, I'm feeling super secure and actually I'm fine. Great. That's wonderful. We like that. But there are also spaces where maybe they weren't, again, victims of anti-Semitism, but they're not comfortable in some way. And for them to know that you are a safe space who's not going to overreact and what do our teens like hate the most? Call their friend's mom to say, I heard your child said something insensitive to my child. But to say, I'm a space for you to talk to so you'll understand what's happening with them. One teen who I work with in the Philadelphia area shared that essentially a year ago, when there was the Colleyville hostage crisis, she had the experience of feeling so isolated that on the weekend that the hostage crisis happened, the whole Jewish community felt so connected. She and her friends from camp were texting each other and checking in and like, did you hear what happened? And are there opportunities for like, who knows more? What are we doing? What are we dealing with here? And then there was this collective sense of relief of, oh my gosh, everyone's okay. And this is amazing. And then she got to school on Monday and no one said a word. The teachers didn't ask her about it. Her friends didn't ask her about it. No one was out there being anti-Semitic and saying like, Jews deserve that, wish it had been worse, God forbid. But there was this silence and this space where for her parent to then go and say like, how you feeling? And for her to acknowledge that she needed an atmosphere of support would have been a tremendous value add.
As a related question, if teens experience anti-Semitism themselves or see others experiencing that in a school setting or a social setting, perhaps it's in reference to the Holocaust or a current event, Kanye West, for example, what's the best way to help your teen through that and to how to advise them on how to respond to other teens?
So depends, totally depends. There's so many different situations when you were saying like school and friends. There's different power dynamics in play for sure. So I'll start with friends. I do not believe, and I really mean this, I don't believe that the majority of the people that our teens are friends with are out and avowed anti-Semites. I do not think that that's what we're dealing with here. Some of them are, and then maybe we have to rethink some friendships. But a lot of the teens who we're talking to and about say awkward things, say obnoxious things, have perhaps heard an anti-Semitic trope either from their own families, within the media, within just our like social norms, and repeated it because it's cool and it's funny and they don't really get it. I don't know if anyone here, if anyone wants to raise their hands or give a shout out, is in Cleveland. But when COVID started, I was living in the Cleveland area and had the distinct pleasure. My colleague was the first positive case of COVID in the state of Ohio. I was in the first 100. And where did we get this? We got it at APAC Policy Conference, where we had gone on a bus with a group of high school seniors to be part of APAC and to lobby and all the things that used to happen at Policy Conference in DC. So the first people to go into lockdown were the Jewish community because we'd gotten back and been in the Federation building and in the various day schools and with these high school seniors who we'd been chaperoning. So people start calling COVID the Jew flu because it rhymes and it's Jew and it's flu and that's funny. And I heard this because there was nothing to do at that time. Nobody else was in lockdown yet, so that we didn't even know what shows to watch or what bread to bake. So all we're doing is texting each other. And the teens themselves are laughing because Jew flu, buddy. And then I have to be there as the downer to say, do you know that there's like an ancient anti-Semitic trope about Jews being accused of bringing a plague to a community and being associated with pestilence and disease? And no, I'm not necessarily saying that every single kid that is saying Jew flu is thinking about the Black Death in Europe right now, but that there is this pervasive sense in our society that this trope is regurgitating itself. So what do we do if it's a friend? I am a huge fan of making things ever so slightly awkward, not for our teens ever to put themselves into a situation where they feel unsafe and are nervous about what the reaction is going to be. Are things going to turn physical? Am I going to be attacked verbally? But when someone does say something to just take that 1 second and say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Give them the chance, once someone has said like an off-color anti-Semitic comment, to then have to repeat it. 9 out of 10 times it'll be, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. And we've given them the chance in the moment to repent and to realize this is not like a values position they've taken. It's an off-color comment from teen to teen. Same thing of, I'm sorry, what did you mean by that? That's a weird thing to say. And to give them a chance as peers, not to make it awkward, not to go up to a friend and who made a Jew joke and to say, I think you're an anti-Semite, and escalate things that way, because so many of our teens have said to me, and I'm sure said to many of us, I didn't want to make it awkward. I didn't want to be like the one who ruined everyone else's good time. So then to figure out, again, what are those subtle ways when it comes to power structures and authorities, in particular teachers, administrators, that's where I think there's more of a role for both us as parents and as the organized Jewish community as a whole to figure out what's happening. Are Jewish students being discriminated against? Are there spaces that we need to be stepping in? And what are the mechanisms for doing so? One of the things that I think is really important to convey to our teens is how willing we are to anonymize things. Teens, they are who they are. We know they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want the pushback that comes with like, my mom called the superintendent because a teacher like wasn't fair to me. Oh my God, that's like more horrifying than the anti-Semitism itself. But to have spaces where the Jewish community is able to anonymize, to say we've received a complaint, it doesn't have to come directly from you, so that they know they can be stood up for without sacrificing their feeling of like social capital and comfort.
I appreciate, Samantha, that you're answering a lot of the questions that are coming in, and we're looking at follow-up questions. One is about your comment on DEI initiatives, that DEI rarely includes Jews when people think about what DEI is.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? And, we are minorities, but are we really part of DEI, and how that relates to addressing anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. And I so appreciate this question. The first thing that I will name is that the Jewish community is by no means monolithic. We are living in a moment where there is the most diverse Jewish community that there has ever been. And that comes in terms of race and color and background and point of origin. And it's absolutely amazing. So first, to say that while many Jews present as white from our Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, that is not by any means the collective story of the Jewish people. And I really just want to name and center that. When it comes, so naming that, when it comes to questions of DEI, it can be really hard to recognize that, oh yeah, I'm included in that, because so many Jewish young people today are so used to showing up for others as allies. They want to be allies. They are amazing allies and activists who are connected to social justice movements in this country and around the world. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely amazing. There's a different vulnerability that comes from saying, actually, I'm the one in need of allyship, and I'm the one who needs that kind of help, and I am a minority, and what does that mean for me to come into a space that I thought wasn't for me, but like maybe it is? There are a lot of layers in terms of just sense of self that need to be unpacked when it comes to this question and all of the sub questions that it brings up. Jews need to be in DEI spaces, because when we're not, it's so easy to overlook us and the experiences that we're having that are not part of typical white America, no matter what the color of each of our skin tones is. Few ways that that's manifested lately in terms of just institutionalized anti-Semitism. There was at Brooklyn College this past year a mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training scheduled for all faculty and staff. Absolutely amazing. There should be lots of work to be done. It was scheduled on Yom Kippur. If Jews aren't in the room in DEI spaces, Is that anti-Semitism to say they overlooked us, they didn't think about us? Probably not. It's probably deeply well-meaning of like, oh, cool, there's a random, I don't remember what day of the week it was this year, Tuesday, Wednesday on the calendar that there isn't another meeting. Check plus. Without anyone to raise up our voices, it's very easy to be silenced, to be excluded, to not understand how our needs as a community are or are not being met. There are questions again of where does it make sense? Where do we belong? But I firmly believe that we do belong in those spaces, and claiming and naming that is absolutely critical.
This is a very specific question, and I appreciate that someone participating tonight offered this up. My 17-year-old had someone at school today ask her if she was Hebrew, since she looked Jewish, then asked if all Jews were rich and what she thought of Kanye West. Do you have any thoughts on how to respond to this? There is a Jew club at school. Beyond that, what can they do? And what could the school do as a whole? It's very tricky.
So many layers. So this could be a space of, again, it's much harder to circle back in the moment. And I name that. I feel like how many of us can say, like, I would have had the perfect comeback to that person 3 days later in my shower, or, while I'm driving or something. And only I had felt it then. So there is a space to say, I'm sorry, what does that mean to look Hebrew? What does it mean to look Jewish? We can approach with the benefit of the doubt, because at least the way that this is phrased, it's a question of, are all Jews rich? As opposed to a statement of all Jews are rich, then it's a different tone and connotation. And the question of what she thought of Kanye West, or I'll say Ye, because that is their preferred moniker and identifier. So first, to name, again, it's not necessarily her responsibility to respond and explain the position of the Jewish community. There is an opportunity to engage and to say, this is what I think. And, by peddling in anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories, Ye has crossed a lot of lines. And that's really hard for those who are fans of his music and those who are fans of him in general. But yeah, this is not okay with me, and to really look at it as an opportunity for dialogue. When it comes to this idea of there being a Jewish club at the school and what the place is of the club and the school, again, I think it all depends. Is there a place for school-wide sensitivity training? Like, probably. Or some kind of does this fall into an anti-bullying space? Possibly. Is there a space for a more proactive Jewish experience? So it's not a punitive thing where someone said something anti-Semitic, so the whole community has to have anti-bullying training, but instead, is there a space for the Jewish club, Jewish students at the school to be more visible, to have call people in rather than calling them out, and have a space to explore, actually, here are all these different ways to look Jewish, and here are all these different opportunities to connect and engage. And we have a plurality of ideas and opinions and thoughts, and invite them into those opportunities. Now, all of this is me giving the benefit of the doubt, and the person could have meant it in a much more cut and dry way. And then unfortunately, I feel like then we do go into that bullying space.
Okay. Someone else asked also specifically about what we can bring to our schools. I think you've just answered that, unless you have anything else to add.
Yeah, there are numerous programs, opportunities. I think depends on where everyone's located, but there are opportunities through JCRCs, through federations, through the ADL. There are spaces that are designated for an instance of hate has occurred. And then there are also these organic, just like, I'm thriving and living my best Jewish life, and what are the opportunities that I have to share that with others?
Okay. Also related, I assume you're familiar with bystander training. This participant asked, and do you think this would be a useful program to be offered to BBY youth? Of course, BBY does partner with the ADL, but what else would you suggest for this large teen youth movement to help its teen participants, bystander training?
I think BBYO does an amazing job of empowering Jewish teens to own their own Jewish stories. And I think ultimately that's one of the best things that we can do, is to help our teens, both in terms of the content and the skill set of conveying their own Jewish stories and journeys and experiences, and being able to own and know them, so that when someone comes up and says, like, what do Jews think about Kanye West? They're not flustered. Maybe they're flustered because that's an incredibly aggressive thing to jump into someone's face and ask, but to be able to know enough to know what they don't know, to say, I don't know what every Jew thinks, but I can tell you what I do, because I have had a chance to think robustly about the complexities of my Jewish identity as part of my overall self, because I identify as a leader, because I've learned about my Jewish story and Jewish history and my place within that. When it comes to bystander training, I think the opportunities to be an upstander versus a bystander, and what that means in different scenarios, are absolutely critical. We want to be allies. We want our teens to feel empowered and proud and confident in how they approach the world. We know that there's a difference between in-person and online, and I would also really name that the things that we say in an in-person context, in terms of, like, we stand up to bullying and we would never let hate speech fly in our friend group, whether it's directed towards us or something else. Totally true. When it comes to online spaces, which again, for our teens are just as real, so much of that is different, because we have the algorithm of social media, and that actually commenting back just bumps up anti-Semitic content by drawing more attention to it, rather than letting it get ignored and buried so much of the times. Then we have this question of, when do I wear which hat? And one thing that I would say is, for some, it could be easy or instinctive perhaps to prioritize the in-person, because online isn't real in the same way, but really to recognize and own, for them it is very real. And when this is coming up online, it is just as frightening and concerning and upsetting as an in real life experience.
Last question. Really do appreciate all of the good questions, everyone. Thinking about college, which is on every high schooler parent's mind, have you heard some college counselors recommending that students not identify themselves as Jewish or highlight their religion in any way in their college applications? What are your thoughts on that issue?
That's horrifying. And I think the same as any other part of our identities, that needs to be called out. If there were a college counselor saying, don't identify as like part of the LGBTQ plus community, and just put that to the side, show up the rest of who you are, but like don't really say anything about that, we would be, as society, like running that person to the ground and saying this is unacceptable, and to say that that's not okay. Again, each student is going to make their own choices in these spaces and figure out when they want to wear their Judaism literally on their chests, on their necks, on their sleeves, and when they don't. I'm not here to judge in any way who chooses to be external and who holds it more internal, but I absolutely think that anyone who is coming and giving the advice, hide who you are, we're not, like, we are a loud and proud community, and we're not doing that, and like we should have a conversation about those people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for answering these questions. Alan, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Okay, am I off mute? Okay, great. So thank you again, Samantha, for a really informative conversation, and to everybody who participated by joining us tonight. Samantha's book can be ordered online, and if you take a look in the chat, you will see a direct link where you can order #Antisemitism, Coming of Age During the Resurgence of Hate. We know that we covered tonight only scratches the surface. BBYO has partnered with ADL to support our teams and our families more intentionally in addressing instances of anti-Semitism, and we look forward to sharing more resources for teens as that partnership develops further. Thank you again for everybody for joining us tonight. This program is part of a series of parent-focused programming that we are going to continue offering throughout the year, and we have a few announcements of other happenings in the BBYO calendar. Coming up next month, our next parent event is going to be taking place live from an international convention in Dallas. on Thursday, February 16th at 3 p.m. Central with Peggy Ornstein on the adult's role in teen hookup culture. Look out for an email that will share details on how you can register for this live event. And stay tuned for more parent events coming up in the next few months. We're going to have several more throughout the spring. Once more, thank you again, everybody, for attending tonight's programming, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I put the link to my website in the chat. Feel free to follow up. I'm getting a lot of private messages, and I'm happy to respond to them.
Thank you.